First of all, a question about how your involvement with this came about. I mean, obviously you were a member back in the 80s, but for this particular incarnation of King Crimson, how did you become involved? Because I know it started with Adrian and Robert this time around.
I don't know much about how it started. This time Robert just called me and asked me if I wanted to do it again, and I said yes. He had to wait quite a while for me because I was on tour with Peter Gabriel.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it. Robert asked me, and I said, of course.
Well, when did he ask you about that?
I'm not very good at years. It was years ago. It was, let's see.
Yeah, he said, I think, something about 91 or 92 when the idea sort of took root.
Yeah, that would be it. 92, I think.
Yeah. And him and Adrian were sort of hammering it out. And just for your own edification, apparently Adrian had heard that there was a rumor that King Crimson was getting back together again, and he still hadn't recovered from the shock of the '84 breakup because he hadn't been made aware of it. So he personally went to Robert and said, I want to be in this band again. And
well, nothing that dramatic with me. Robert asked me to do it, and I was busy, and fortunately he was willing to wait,
mm-hmm.
and everything worked out.
Are you generally the type of musician that keeps your schedule booked solid?
It's not really up to me. It varies a lot. It's probably the same as with anyone who's freelance in any field.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm very busy and have to turn down good things, and sometimes I'm not so busy and I'm home a lot. Excuse me, it varies.
Okay, and for King Crimson, obviously you enjoyed the 80s version of it enough to say yes without hesitation this time around.
Yes, well, Crimson is one of the biggest challenges for me. Musically, it's wonderful because it's a band where I can do whatever I want, and we can push the boundaries of what's been done before, both musically as a band and individually on our instruments.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an ideal band for me. There was no question that I would want to do it again if I had the choice, so I'm happy we're doing it.
There's been a lot made of this, the format, the double trio that they're calling it. You have to play with Trey Gunn, who is another stick player, another bassist. How exactly do you divide up the roles?
Well, to begin with, we didn't know how we would divide it up. It was Robert's vision was that it would be a good idea to try, and I respect his musicality a lot. So I said, even though I hadn't played with Trey, hardly knew him, I said, let's go for it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we were actually together and trying to work it out, that's the point where we tried to find ways to work it out. The way, on this album, Thrack, the way it's come about between me and Trey is that he plays stick, and I don't really play stick on this album. I play all bass or electric upright or some other bass instrument. In the future it might change, but at the moment we're not both playing stick, at least on the record. We didn't know that it would work out that way, it just came about that way. And generally generally on this record I gravitated towards the low parts, the lowest of the low parts, and Trey played octaves above it or guitar parts. It won't necessarily always be that way, but that's the way it happened this time.
You yourself are a stick player of note. If I remember correctly, how is it that Trey ended up with the stick part?
Well, in rehearsal we tried things where we both played stick, and we tried things where I played bass, and it just sometimes in a band you don't know why things happen. It just organically happens that way. Mm-hmm. It just worked out that I played more and more bass. Actually, I played a lot of upright bass and a lot with a bow. And that was not a plan at all. It just worked out that way. I couldn't say why.
Yeah.
And I also wouldn't say that it will stay that way. I know when we play live, we will do a stick duet. We recorded a little duet, the two of us. It won't make it onto the record, but we enjoyed that. So that'll be a little important part of the live show.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the record, the two sticks just weren't the right thing for the songs that we ended up doing.
I've got an advanced copy of Thrack here.
Good for you.
Do any of the tracks stand out? I mean, like maybe you could fill us in on like one or two tracks where you and Trey particularly worked hard, or just for some reason they stick out in your mind?
Well, as far as me and Trey, let me think. I think I could be wrong here. I'm not. That's the kind of thing I would have had on the list. Actually, I don't have it on the list.
You want me to read off the songs for you?
No, I know. I remember the titles, but I'm a little hazy on musically which titles are which. I think it's the song "Vroom Vroom," which would be near the end. I think.
Right.
That has a bass section, quote unquote, where the two of us play the melody, and I think we split off into harmonizing with each other. So that's an interesting section. There's also on Vroom itself, the first song. Again, there's a kind of quiet section where the drummers stop. Robert plays a little background guitar figure, and I play a melody on fretless bass, and Trey worked in a counter melody on stick. So quite different than what we thought we would be doing, where we both play bass parts. We found that we were both sharing melody parts and taking over the melody for just a minute. The melody function. These are the kind of things that it could end up that we do that a lot, and that it's one of the options Crimson has for a section of a song, or it could be that we go off in different directions. The next album, we could end up both playing stick for the whole album, or not. It's nice being in a band where the boundaries aren't defined, and however much you discuss a plan, what organically happens is really a function of the chemistry of the band and not any one person's idea. Another example of that, of what I'm talking about, is in the beginning, one of the main plans was to be, quote, a double trio, and to divide functions up between two trios and play back and forth with the two trios. In practice, we ended up hardly doing that. It's the direction we still want to go in, but it wasn't an easy direction to go in, and we had other things that surprised us that were good and kind of occupied us, so we didn't explore that direction as much as we thought we would. It is explored a tiny bit in that I think the first song, Vroom, the mix, again, I'm not up to date on what the final mix is, but I think the mix of that is such that each trio is completely on one side, so that you can listen to that song with all six players, or by turning your playback to completely the right or the left, you can hear either of the trios. The trios being Robert, Trey, and Pat Mastelotto on one side, and me, Bill, and Adrian on the other. But that's the only extent that we got into the double trio idea.
And this Crimson this time around seems to be more consciously obsessed with Crimson's past. They're stylistically, Robert calls it metal Crimson. She says it harkens back to the days of Red. How about your own opinion? Is that your
musically? I hear that. I don't know why it came about. I didn't think it was intended. Maybe Robert did have an idea. We never talk about those things. But I listened to it, and it harkens somewhat of the old Crimson and somewhat of the Beatles. It has a lot of Beatle influence, and we're not a band that is afraid of that. Normally, you try and sound completely up to date and modern, and not have many references to anything that's past. But with Crimson, we just do what the band has its own life. The music has its own life, and we let it happen, and we try to be unafraid of what happens. I don't mean that the music sounds old at all, but and there is some groundbreaking stuff, quite a bit of it. But there is a reminiscence, at least in some of the songs, especially the instrumentals, to the old Crimson style, even though the makeup of the band is quite different.
Were you yourself a big Crimson fan before actually joining the band?
Not at all. In fact, I never listened to the old Crimson stuff until I had to learn it to play it live.
Well, then what tempted you to originally join the discipline Crimson back in the 80s?
Well, it was very much the same as this time. I was asked to do it. I knew Robert and respected him a lot. I had played with him live and on record with Peter Gabriel, and I think at that point I had done Robert's album. And I thought anything Robert does is good enough for me. Mm-hmm. And actually at that time, I think it must have been 1980, I had to go audition and play with the other guys so they could check me out. Mm-hmm. But it sounded like an exciting project. So.
And having gone back to the older stuff, what's your opinion of this, like 70s Crimson?
Well, I haven't learned any more of the old stuff in a long time. It's back in the 80s that I went back and learned the 70s stuff because we would play it for encores and stuff. And I didn't learn it all. It's very nice, very interesting, and very good bass parts, so it's fun for me.
Well, what kind of music were you originally into? What kind of a music fan are you?
I have a background, a mixed background in different kinds of music. A long time ago, I was a classical player, and I was a jazz player for many years, and then I became a studio player, and then I left all of that to become a rock player, which is where I've stayed, and somehow something deep inside me is much happier playing rock than any of the other styles. Actually, I listen mostly to classical music.
You listen mostly to classical?
Yeah.
And when you were playing classical, what was your instrument?
Upright bass. Yeah, I have always, forever been a bass player.
It seems like...
And in fact, I should mention here that the return to the upright bass, I mentioned before that I play electric upright bass a lot in the new Crimson, and the return to the upright bass is something pretty new for me. I did play it a little on the last Peter Gabriel tour, but now I'm playing it a lot with Crimson with the bow, and for me it's a very unintended and interesting reversion to the way I used to play a lot when I was a kid. I haven't really played with a bow in a long, long time. And here I find myself doing it a lot with Crimson.
But you don't feel like awkward going back to that, like maybe the stage is not the right place for it?
No, I don't know why it seemed right to do it, but it seemed right in a musical way. So.
You, I guess, contributed a song called King Crimson Barbershop to the box set.
That's true.
Yeah, which the interviewer here seems to, on the basis of this, he seemed to think you're maybe one of the more sort of detached members of King Crimson. You can kind of step back a little bit and add an element of humor or whatever. Is that the case?
Well, that, of course, some of us do have a sense of humor. It doesn't come out in the music much. The music is dead serious, isn't it?
Yeah.
And to be in the band, personally, for me, and probably for all of us, is very challenging personally, in addition to musically, because it's such an intense band. There isn't too much room for humor. Sometimes Adrian gets a little humor in the lyrics, and he's a happy-go-lucky guy on stage. But generally, Crimson is certainly one of the more serious and the most intense band I've ever been in. However, some of us do, of course, have a sense of humor. What's called the Crimson Barbershop Quartet now was a joke I did while we were recording, I think, the Beat album. I could be wrong about that, but I think it was back in the Beat album. And I wrote it in my head, and I had this idea of us all playing it on stage, live on stage, not recording it at all. And I suggested it to the guys, and of course they wanted to hear it, and I couldn't write the music out. I mean, I couldn't give them the written out music and expect them to sing it. So I went in early one day while we were recording and recorded the 4 parts just quickly myself so that they could hear it, hoping that they would do it live. Well, they just took one look at it and listened to it, and I think they left the room or something. They chuckled, but it was out of the question to sing it. Nobody wanted to. One of the many ideas that people bring in that doesn't work. And I never gave it another thought until I heard it on this record. It was not done as a finished recording, or I would have redone some of the parts more in tune. But heck, why not? Once again, it's an example of Robert and Crimson being unafraid to do stuff. Basically, through this demo joke that I had done by myself on the record.
Yeah,
however, to recap, it was my intention for all of us to sing it, and that's why I'm playing the part of each guy when I sing that. And I was a little embarrassed to hear it because it's very rough and out of tune, but yeah, it's funny, and it's not surprising to realize that we didn't end up doing it live on stage because it really wasn't suitable for us.
You know, consistently, all of you guys do use the word a challenge to describe King Crimson. What exactly is the challenge like? I mean, it's obviously very clear to you, but for example, tell us about the difference between when you play with Gabriel and when you play with Crimson. How would you define the difference?
There are vast differences. Quite frankly, playing with Peter. Well, let me back up. Playing with Peter musically is great, but playing with Peter is also a lot of fun. And touring with Peter is a lot of fun. And Peter, I've been touring with Peter forever. And he looks for ways to have fun on the road and do excursions of unusual things that have nothing to do with our shows and things like that. Playing with Crimson musically is great, and I like the guys and we get along fine, but it's not a whole lot of fun. It's very intense. The guys are very intense, and the music we do is very intense. So, actually, I talk about touring. We haven't toured with Crimson in quite a while. The touring just progresses on its own. What's very difficult for us with Crimson is writing and recording. In other words, spending a few months cooped up together in a creative process in a room. This is probably hard for any band, especially bands that write together, that don't come in with the music completely finished and just perform it. In our case, like I said, the guys are very intense, and it's not that there's a lot of friction, it's just that there's a lot of, what's the word? Creative stress. And gradually it takes its toll on all of us, and it's an effort. It's an effort of will and of artistic integrity to stick with it for a month, 2 months, to be with Crimson and come in every morning and spend all day trying to create and push yourself to do something that you've never done before on your instrument, and push the other guys to do stuff that they've never done, make it all work and make it all have enough integrity that it's worth putting out under the name King Crimson. That's quite an effort. We always feel very relieved when we finish writing a project that we survived it without just breaking up from the pressure of having to create in that situation. I'm sure we're not the only band like this, but this is the way it is with us, and I don't know I haven't heard what the other guys say about it, but it wouldn't surprise me that nobody pretends that it's easy and fun, because it isn't.
Well, does that sort of creative tension take its toll on the personal relationships between the members of the band, or can you guys just sort of sit back and be cool professionals from beginning to end?
Yeah, it's not that way. It doesn't really affect personal relationships in a way that I can see. However, we don't sit back and be cool professionals either. It lies in some other place than that, and we interact personally in an okay way, but I think the musical and creative things that are going on overtake the personal stuff, and after a while it doesn't matter personally. You might be going out for a beer afterwards and having a little fun, or in my case going out for coffee, make an espresso for the guys and having an espresso break, but those breaks have less and less to do with your day, and the music and the intensity of it wraps us up in it and envelops us, and so that really there's no life. This happened very much in the recording of Thrak. I was aware as the weeks went on that I had less contact with the outside world. Even if I spoke to the outside world, the power of the music we were doing just kind of took me over, and it was a stress to cope with it. And I was very relieved to finish and leave, even though I loved doing it, and I'm very proud of and happy with what came out.
Mm-hmm. Are you closer to in particular to anybody in the band, or are all the other five guys pretty much the same to you?
I would say that, speaking of the old quartet, we're none of us are what I would call close friends, but we're all friends. I like them all. I have a lot of respect and musical respect for all of the guys in the band. And Trey and Pat, the two, quote, new guys, I've known for a much shorter time. I didn't know them before this incarnation of Crimson. And they're both very nice, and they are my friends. But I'd say I have an older relationship that's maybe a little closer with the other guys. And after one tour, we'll all be let me interrupt that with the thought that there's a good analogy between a band and a family, especially when a band is on the road. You get a kind of closeness and the kind of tensions that exist in a family. And like in a family, you can't really escape the other guys. Your lot is thrown in with them, and whether their quirks and foibles annoy you or not, that's part of your life. And also there's just a commitment to them, and you've thrown your lot in together with them. So Crimson, like any other band, is like many families with some good functions of how it works together and some not so great functions. And I like and respect all of the guys in the band, both personally and musically. And it's a good thing for me at this stage of my career, having done a lot of tours and playing. I'm aware that I'm unhappy in a band where I don't like somebody, and I'd rather not go out and spend my time on the road in that kind of situation, no matter how good the music is. So it works out very good for me that I like all the guys.
Moving away from Crimson, I got a couple of questions on you, and I'll let you go. You've done a lot of session work, I guess. Everybody from John Lennon to Japanese performers like Goro Noguchi.
Yeah.
What is it about you? Is it your versatility, your virtuosity? What is it that makes you such an instant sell in the session market?
I have no idea. To begin with, I'm not the busiest or main guy. I never have been, but I have certainly done a great number of albums, and I've been lucky to play with some great people. I am less and less of what you call a session player. There were days in the 70s when I would do 2 or 3 album projects each day. And by the time the 80s came, I was down to only doing projects that meant something musically. Nowadays, I only do a few a year. So I'm less and less of that kind of player, and happy about it, because really I consciously prefer live touring a lot. And of course, I need to do the album to do the tour. So just to do projects like Peters and then King Crimson is enough for me. Once in a while I get the chance to play on a special album that's different, someone else's, but I just don't have the time anymore to do too much of that.
How about this?
How I got that work is just down to luck. I do play the bass well, but I never know why people call me, and I never really ask why they call me to play on their album. Can I mention here that I'm just about finished with my solo album. I've never done a solo album, and this last year I've been recording a solo CD, and I really have no idea when that will come out in Japan or on what label, but that's been an interesting project for me.
Well, that was actually the next question. Why don't you tell us how that came about and who you've done it with and what kind of music it is?
I've had offers through the years to do solo records, and I've never wanted to. It just doesn't suit it just doesn't suit me. I'm very much a bass player and not an organizer, and not someone who wants to sit down and write. And most of all, what I never wanted to do is take the time. I have precious little time at home, and I never wanted to take it to do yet another project. However, a year and a half ago, a good friend of mine suggested to me that while I'm on the road, I record. He suggested to me that I get an ADAT, that's a digital recorder, and take it on the road with me and record myself with some of the interesting musicians I meet on the road. And I did indeed exactly that. And so what I have is a series of instrumental duets and trios and more with very interesting players around the world, and it was all recorded in different parts of the world while I was on the road. And now this winter I've been in a local studio near Woodstock, where I live, Woodstock, New York, overdubbing it and resequencing it and fixing it up to come out. And it's a very small, musically small kind of project, but I feel very good about it, and it's got some very interesting musical ideas on it.
Who's on it?
Who's on it? This is what I would have had written down to help you with the spelling.
Uh-huh.
I'll start with the... who will I start with? Brian Yamakoshi, Yamakoshi, playing koto.
Mm-hmm.
There's a duet with koto and stick.
Mm-hmm.
Another song with Brian, with koto and stick, and Jerry Marotta playing drums. There are two tracks with Bendik, Bendik, a Norwegian saxophone player. There are two tracks with Ayub Ogada, Ayub Ogada, who plays a Kenyan instrument called nyatiti, Nyatiti. So there's two tracks of nyatiti and bass. There is Levin Minassian, Minassian, who plays the wonderful instrument called the duduk, D-O-U-D-O-U-K. It's a double reed instrument that has, I think it's from Armenia, the instrument, and he can be heard on some of Peter Gabriel's music. That's how I met him, through Peter. He toured with us a little bit, and I did some tracks with Levin, in which I played upright bass, including one which also has Manu Katché on drums. There's one track with Shankar playing violin and singing, where I play stick.
So,
okay, it's more. Yes, there are two tracks with the percussion ensemble called Nexus out of Toronto, Nexus, and they play a wild assortment of worldwide percussion, and they had hundreds of percussion instruments with them, and again I played the stick. Well, very hard for me to describe musically what all of this sounds like, but each track is a collaboration between two or among three or more of us, and it's interesting.
It sounds like kind of a world music, world beat, experimental kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to learn a way to describe it. It certainly sounds like it falls into the world music, not world beat, but world music thing, because they are world musicians. The thing that makes it hard for me to categorize it that way is that I'm not a world musician, and there I was in the studio. We interacted very much as instrumental players. We wrote the music on the spot, and I tried to. The name of my album is World Diary. Each track is accompanied with my diary of the day and some photos, and I tried to have the music reflect very much the feeling of the surroundings and the time that we did it. So it's quite a spontaneous musical project.
That's right. You're also a photographer of note, aren't you?
I released a photo book called Road Photos back in the 80s. Unfortunately, I ran out of them. I didn't print enough, so I no longer sell that book. But yes, I enjoy photography. I used to, and again will do with Crimson, I used to have a tripod on stage all the time with a camera ready, aimed and focused and ready to shoot, and one of my foot pedals triggered this camera. So for years I had pictures from stage of the back of whatever artist I was playing with in the audience, or if someone came up on stage or anything unusual happened, I would have pictures of it. And indeed, I have thousands of pictures of every tour I did because of that. I'd say the high point of my doing that was trying to get one specific picture during Peter Gabriel's show of Shock the Monkey, when we all jumped up in the air singing the word shock. And I took it over and over again for a year every time we played it on the tour. And finally I got one picture that came out right, and I was very proud of that. But for an example, since this is a Japanese interview, I have pictures of Goro Noguchi and Joe Yamanaka, whom I toured with, and me in the picture. These are not pictures that came out in the book, but and just about every other artist I've worked with, I have pictures from on stage. It's an interesting vantage point that doesn't get used much. Technically, it's a bit difficult because, of course, the stage is well lit, but the audience isn't. You know, we just played the Woodstock Festival last summer with Peter Gabriel, and it was very important to me to get some pictures of it, just to have them. And I had a hard time because the audience had lit hundreds of thousands of candles and were holding them up. But the nature of the light was the stage light was much brighter. It was practically very hard to get both in one picture.
Did you have fun?
I can't say that I succeeded too well in that particular picture, but I tried. I also think since we've reincarnated Crimson, I've jumped back into taking a lot of pictures, black and whites, with an eye towards eventually doing a book, photo and written book, of the history of King Crimson in the 80s and 90s, of the versions that I was in. So I'm documenting this tour very well, not only photographically, but in my computer that I carry around, I've written an extensive program to document, isn't the best word, but to chronicle all of the details of the tour. So I actually can say at any moment to any of the guys in the band how many miles we've traveled and what hotels we stayed in, and whether the windows opened in the hotels and what kind of towels they had, and even to the extent of what we call the quote of the day, where the funniest thing anyone says every day, I write it in, and we have access to this quite interesting program, and after a few years it'll be very interesting. I imagine it will almost for sure surface as some kind of book or program or something.
Mm-hmm. Did you have fond memories of the work you've done with Japanese artists?
Oh yeah, and I've done a lot, much more than what we said. I don't think it's 7 a.m. here, and I haven't prepared for this, so I'm not really prepared to go through who I've worked with and what I thought of the albums. I'm a little too much in a daze to do that, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about that.
But just off the top of your head, does anything come to mind? You mentioned Goro Noguchi and Joe Yamanaka.
Well, those are the two that I toured with. Mm-hmm. So it's a common thing for Japanese artists to come to America and do an album. Sometimes very good albums, and sometimes with very interesting combinations of musicians. And I've done a number of those, which were good. I'd have to do some thinking and consult my notes to know what to say about each one. Mm-hmm. But with Goro, I came to Tokyo, and really we toured all of Japan, and it was a special few weeks for me. I remember it quite well, even though it was quite a while ago. I couldn't tell you the year, mm-hmm. and I haven't heard from him in a long time. I don't know at all what he's up to. But
mm-hmm. Did you remember what your first gig was as a professional bassist?
No, but I can tell you what my first gig was in the studio. When I was 7 years old, my father was a radio engineer and invited me to come in to the radio station where he works, and as a birthday present for my mother, we recorded me playing the piano. And I have this record, and it is a record because in those days there was only vinyl. We recorded what's called direct onto disc.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning of it, I say, to Mother on her birthday, June 8th, 1952. Can you believe it? It was a long time ago. So that's the first record I played on, and it was there were no LPs, and there were no. These records were breakable in those days. You sound from your voice like you weren't even alive then. Mind you, I was pretty young, but I haven't been in the studio ever since then. But I was in at a terrifically young age.
Do you remember your worst gig?
There are many. I could talk probably an hour about that. I don't think I'm not focused enough to pick out one.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much live, but in the studio, there have been many amusing disasters through my career. And maybe next time we speak about the next interview, I'll prepare a list of them and have interesting stories.
I'd imagine some of the better work has been stuff like with Paul Simon or John Lennon.
Yes, John, I only did the one series of sessions over a period of a month or two, whereas Paul, I worked for years on different albums and again, toured a great deal with Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Those are musically very special. And, with John Lennon, we were going to tour the world. It's really a tragedy that didn't happen, and, of course, a tragedy that his life was cut short.
Mm-hmm.
With Paul, I did some very special work and had a nice time in the band.
How about Carly Simon? Does that stand out very much?
Well, Carly's a friend, and I've done a few albums with her. I never toured much with her. She used to have this terrible problem about stage fright, so she would book a tour and then cancel it soon after it began. And I would joke with her about it because we would all know it was going to get canceled. But, this was, again, quite a long time ago. I'm not talking about the modern, even 80s and 90s Carly. I don't think she has the same problem anymore.
And I would imagine among the best experiences must be King Crimson. Then, I mean, would you tell your grandchildren, if you ever have them, that these were the finest musical days of my life, or something like that?
It's funny. I'm not a guy who thinks in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't categorize the musical projects I'm doing. You might meet many other musicians like me in this sense. I get completely wrapped up in what I'm doing while I'm doing it. When it ends, I move on to the next thing and get completely wrapped up in that. I never stand back and look at them with any kind of perspective. However, having said that, I'm very, very pleased with this Thrak album. I think not only did I do very good work, but I think I can say safely it's my favorite Crimson album that I've done musically. And I'm looking forward, of course, to playing live with it. So there's some perspective, at least a little I have on it. Yes, Crimson is for sure one of the most musically, the most challenging musically thing that I do, and one of the most satisfying musically.
Mm-hmm. And the last question is, how old are you now?
I'm 48. I was born in 1946.
Okay. Well,
that's why I was recording in 1953 or 52 or whatever I said.
It was sort of extreme.
Yeah, it goes way back, doesn't it? It surprises me to hear those numbers, because I can tell anyone who hasn't been there, when you're 48, you don't feel like you're 48. And if you're playing rock, the number 48 doesn't seem to fit in, but there it is.
Well, Tony, I'm truly sorry to roust you out of bed like this.
Oh, you didn't? I was awake, but
okay.
No problem.
Yeah. Well,
and it's one less thing I have to do tomorrow morning.
That's right. Well, I thank you very much for your cooperation.
Thank you very much. It's been very nice.
Once again, this was for Rocking On Magazine.
Yes, and I'm only, in thinking back, I have this nagging feeling of that in my own album I forgot one or two musicians. Can I just add to what, this is all on tape, I assume?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, the world musicians, here's one that I know you know, the one that I know you know. His name is Bill Bruford. There are two tracks with Bill Bruford where I asked Bill, Bill's an easy guy to ask to do unusual things.
Uh-huh.
I asked him to play the melody parts on his electric percussion. He has a whole drum kit that's completely electric.
Mm-hmm.
And so I played the harmony and background on the stick where he played melodies and made up melodies on the electric percussion. So that's 2 more of the tracks on my World Diary CD.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that covers all of them.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.